Hello.
Hi, Ian. Greetings from America. This is Cosmik Laila from the CLCI Webzine. How are you today?
Oh, pretty much the same as I was yesterday, really. And hopefully about the same as I'll be tomorrow, because at my age, continuity is everything.
Oh, okay. It's hard to come up with questions no one has asked you before, but I'll give it a go. First,
Okay.
First, some silly, nasty questions, and then we'll get to the good ones, okay?
Whatever you say.
Okay. How did it come about that you were standing on one foot when you play the flute?
Because I used to play harmonica, and when I played the harmonica, I cupped the microphone in my hand as I played the harmonica, and I stood on one leg. I don't know why, it just sort of felt good.
Mm-hmm.
And the first people who ever wrote about Jethro Tull noted that Jethro Tull had a flute player, and that he stood on one leg, but it didn't mention the fact that it was really when I played harmonica that I stood on one leg, and so I decided I'd better learn to play the flute standing on one leg as well, and it was easier than I thought.
Oh, I
so
see.
it became a bit of a trademark, courtesy of the media who misrepresented me in the first place.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting story. Is your short pinky useful when playing flute solos, or is it an encumbrance?
It definitely makes life quite difficult because there are 1, 2, 3 keys down there that my finger has to play, and it doesn't work very well, so quite often it's a source of wrong notes. Most of the time it works, it just doesn't extend very far. But sometimes it just seems to freeze up, which is not very helpful.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But that's just one small defect in my physical anatomy. The rest of my protuberances are in good condition, so I'm told.
Okay. Do you believe there are such things as gnomes, trolls, elves, and/or fairy folk?
I think that we have to think of those in the same way as we think of other manifestations of the spiritual world. They may not be real in the sense of the same physical dimension that we think we enjoy day to day in the temporal reality of our lives, but because they seem strangely timeless as part of our culture and traditions and folklore, it is, potentially, it's a bit like, aliens, ghosts, even the belief in supernatural spiritual entities. It's something, I don't think we should write it off as being purely a figment of imagination, because I think in some realm, perhaps these things do exist and brush up against our reality from time to time. So I don't disbelieve. I have an open mind about it, as I do about most aspects of organized religion. I have an open mind. I'm not a believer, but I'm not a disbeliever. So you can put me down as an agnostic somewhere on the scale of 1 to 10. You can probably call me a 6.
Oh, I see.
I'm inclined to believe in the possibility of some Godhead, if we want to put it in general terms. But I am a keen supporter of Christianity and the Christian Church. I just don't qualify for full membership.
I see. Have you met any of those kinds of creatures?
No, I've had 2 or 3, I suppose, little moments of strange ghostly manifestation in my life, that I would say were inexplicable, and it would be easy to build upon those and convince myself that I had been in the presence of some spirits. But as I say, I'm too level-headed and a little bit too generally
like skeptical,
open-minded. Well, yes, a healthy skepticism isn't a bad thing. it becomes an unhealthy skepticism when your president decides that there is no such thing as climate change, or at least that it's not man-made, therefore let's dig some more coal and have a party.
Oh, yeah, I hear you there. What was the significance of the Heavy Horses album in the days of disco and punk, and why is it unique for you?
Well, I don't think that when punk and disco and new wave and the general developments of music in the 70s, when that came along, it didn't dispel the music that had preceded it in terms of classic rock, progressive rock, prog, folk rock, whatever you want to call it. It didn't make it go away. It was simply another slightly younger generation finding their own musical taste, their own musical experience, and fans of Star Trek didn't disappear from the planet or the universe when the first couple of series came to an end.
Yeah.
They just laid low for a bit, and eventually Star Trek became a cult hit with replays, and then went on to more episodes and a couple of movies. So it doesn't go away. It just means that for a while, perhaps it's not the flavor of the month, but the people who are fans of that, they remain fans for life. They do in music, they do in literature, they do in movies. Just because Jack Nicholson is a tub of lard these days, so one of our national newspapers pointed out with a photograph today, that doesn't mean that we don't love his movies and his performances and his acting skills. And should he, as an overweight elderly man, decide to grace our screens again, we'll all be tuned in with huge delight to watch what he does next. So,
absolutely, yeah.
It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. It just maybe recedes for a while, and
and sometimes
come back.
sometimes it passes on to the the new generations too. I mean, it depends on their exposure to that niche or whatever.
Yeah, well, there's two members of the Sex Pistols have told me personally they were fans of Jethro Tull at the time the Sex Pistols were coming to fruition as the leading exponents of punk music in the mid-70s in the UK. And that was at a time when, I suppose, more than any other, the whole notion of prog rock was being debunked by media and new fans of music. But I think we always have to remember that there are lots of fans, of our band and many others of our ilk who come from other walks of musical life, and might seem a little odd, but they we count amongst those people who would describe themselves as fans, people from the world of heavy metal, and folk music and jazz and contemporary music played by relatively young people. So it doesn't go away. It just stays there somewhere, bubbling, simmering like a delicate stew on your kitchen hob.
Oh, well put, man. You seem to be able to handle being on tour for what appears to be years at a time. Is performance a means of exercise, or do you really enjoy it?
Well, it's certainly both a physical and a mental exercise. It requires a huge amount of focus and attention and preparation, but as long as you're doing it fairly regularly, you don't feel the pain too much. But if I'm not on the road for a month, then I am aware of there being a bit of at least the peak of the mountain remains to be climbed every time. It's not like starting right at the bottom and having to climb the whole damn thing, but you do have to make a little preparation. But in an ideal world, I would play, I would travel to my destination on a Thursday. I would perform on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I'd come home on Monday morning and sleep in my own bed for the next 3 nights.
Yeah, so you do it right.
I feel that would be an ideal life. Unfortunately, whilst I can do that in Europe, I can't really do it once we go beyond Yekaterinburg or or the Balkans or Israel or somewhere, that's within a 3 or 4 hour piece of travel. To go and visit the USA just for 3 shows in a week and come home would really be very arduous from a traveling point of view. So when I do the USA, or if I do Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, then it usually has to be for a couple of weeks to make financial sense of it, because it's quite expensive and time-consuming to get to those places.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Okay, the next question is, what is the weirdest thing that ever happened to you in your travels?
The weirdest thing? I'm not sure really what qualifies as being weird.
Well, unusual,
Well, I'd like to think that pretty much everywhere I go there's something unusual about it. I don't experience boredom or a sense of deja vu just because I'm returning to Berlin for the 20th time or something. It's always exciting, and every time I go, I find something new about the city that I like and I want to enjoy. And same thing might apply to New York or Boston, possibly not to Los Angeles, but there you go. Lots of things happen, but
anything that stands out in particular? Go ahead.
Yeah, there are lots of memorable places that I've traveled, but I wouldn't say this because they're necessarily unusual or weird. I mean...
Yeah, well, the question was, does anything happen, like an experience that stood out while you were, traveling around?
Well, we've certainly experienced our shares of riots and tear gas and
oh my gosh,
fighting in the streets.
Oh my gosh!
Particularly during the early 70s in Italy, on a few occasions, we've been tear gassed along with the audience because there was a bit of a flirtation with communism going on amongst naive and idealistic students who, in the early 70s, decided communism was the way to go, and that led to a lot of hostilities with the authorities, and of course our concerts became a suitable battleground for that kind of social unrest. And I had to be very careful not in any way to get allied with that young communist movement, because it was short-lived.
Yeah, I know.
And as it was in Germany, it was not even a generation. It was just a relatively hardcore group of left-wing students who, for 2 or 3 or 4 years, were being a bit of a pain in the arse.
Yeah,
whilst,
right.
As a pragmatic socialist, I can feel some degree of sympathy with some of their anger and their concerns. But as a benevolent capitalist, I can also look upon it as being very wasteful of resources and very naive and ultimately very counterproductive.
Okay. In the 60s, many pop stars were taking drugs. Did you ever take drugs such as LSD or pot?
I never took. I smoked cigarettes. Caffeine and nicotine were my constant companions. But beyond that, I have yet to indulge in what you would call drugs. But that's not from a moralistic point of view that I abstain or have disdain for any of that. It's just, I'm rather practical. I don't really see the point in risking my health and my mind by doing something that I might well become overly fond of, because I probably do have an addictive personality. I mean, when I smoked cigarettes, I smoked 2 packs a day at one point. And,
I see.
I was well aware that, I wouldn't want to translate that into crack cocaine. So,
right.
But then, on the other hand, there is probably about a 50% chance that I will end my days on a morphine drip, dying from one of the more popular cancers. And at that point, I think ahead, well, I've been in the presence of people in their final hours on morphine, and I just hope when the time comes, it's as good as people say it is. Maybe I can manage a deathbed interview and tell you how my first and last drug experience is going.
Okay, all right. Do you believe in reincarnation, and do you think it's possible that somehow you were reincarnated from a previous menstrual?
I would imagine that if well, it's another of those distinctly kind of possible ideas, but what I don't think is that we remember a previous life, if such a thing exists. I don't think we go on with a sense of continuity. I think if there is any reincarnation, we are born into another, our soul becomes part of a future independent, free-thinking identity, which we can't possibly think of in terms of, oh, it's me again. So I don't discount it any more than I have a cat who is uncannily like a previous cat who died 4 years ago.
Wow.
And 3 years ago we got another kitten who seemed to begin with to be absolutely, unlike any other kitten that we've had. But after about 6 or 8 months, he really started to take on the personality of a previous cat that we had, and his relationship with me in particular is so, almost frighteningly the same. And it would be tempting to think, oh, it's old Bargy. He's come back this time as Samir.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to let myself really believe that, because I just think that's something a little dangerous to start getting, that kind of level of belief. If I had old Bargy cloned, because cats, curiously, are one of the creatures that are easier than others to clone, and we had a new kitten who was the clone of our previous pet, it wouldn't, my belief is that it would be no more likely to be the same as the previous generation than just simply getting a new kitten. I don't really believe that cloning will produce something. But there are so many variables involved in the growth, the upbringing, the development of people, animals.
Absolutely.
I don't think you can simply clone a pet or your ex-husband and expect to get the same thing again.
That's very true.
As I believe somebody, was it Barbara Streisand or somebody seems recently to have done that with some pet dog and discovered that it actually is nothing like the original dog. Some demented female in USA.
Yeah, that does sound like it.
Movie culture. I think somebody just did that fairly recently.
Yeah, well, there's actually an interesting movie called The Boys from Brazil where they were talking about cloning Hitler, and they were having a lot of trouble because they had to set up all these different circumstances in his life in order to try and get him to grow up to be Hitler, basically. And the end of the movie was basically they didn't do it very well, because ultimately it came down to independent choice of the child that was supposed to be Hitler when he grew up. So
well, there you go.
Yep, absolutely. Okay.
That, however, is not going to stop Donald Trump from trying.
Okay. This is probably another silly. Okay. Do you consider yourself a storyteller?
On occasion, but I think of myself really more as an observer. I don't necessarily think that there has to be temporal continuity in the lyrics of a song. I think it can be more like a painting. It can be more of a creating a visual reference, and you present that through music. But it doesn't necessarily have to have a beginning, middle, and an end. It doesn't have to tell a story. Mm-hmm. But on occasion, maybe there is some development. I'm more of an observer. I'm more of I think like a painter rather than a novelist.
I see, like a painter that paints time instead of a canvas, right?
Well, possibly, but it's equally more often in my case that I'm not really interested in the passing of time during the lyrics of a song. I'm more interested in giving you a snapshot.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I have quite a few moderately sophisticated cameras in my possession, and I almost never use them for shooting video. I'm only interested in still photography. And I like to capture that moment, capture that instant. And it's an instant that just does not require time to have any association. I have little interest in shooting video. I really don't. Never have done since the beginning of, and we are going back to 1972 when I first got a video tape recorder. Quite expensive back then, and terrible quality, and just in black and white. And we used it just really for a little bit of analysis of some rehearsals and stage production stuff. But it goes back that far. 1972. The first user video cameras were available to buy, and and I just saw them as a useful tool.
Yeah.
But in terms of there being something of artistic expression, I didn't have a lot of time for it.
I see.
It's just not my level of interest. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy watching a movie from time to time and watching documentaries and watching professional video stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
But and I work a lot in terms of video editing and working on the stuff that we use in our show.
All right.
But when it comes to me, I'm more of an observer who likes to capture the instant.
All
and
right.
A song for me is more like a photograph or a painting.
Okay. Where do you draw your inspiration from for your writing, not just sitting on a park bench?
Well, it comes from an intellectual standpoint. It comes from looking around at the world, in the present day particularly, but also sometimes historically. And from an emotional point of view, it has to do with my reaction or my imagined reaction that other people might have to some scenario. I don't necessarily, when I write songs, relate them in terms of personal experience. I try and use my imagination a little bit to imagine a scenario in which I will eventually sing the song I've written, more like an actor in a play. I'm getting into character. So if you hear me in the lyrics of a song saying I or me, then don't necessarily assume that this is from personal experience or that I'm giving you my personal opinion or a personal reaction to something. I'm in character in the same way as an actor in a theater is getting into character. And so, if the actor is playing Hitler, you've got to be careful that when that actor walks outside the stage door, that you don't assume that that you're asking Hitler for his autograph, because you're probably talking to someone who's, as a professional, is doing this night after night, day after day, and has spent 6 weeks in rehearsal learning to be Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
But, he's going home to his wife and kids and is just an actor doing his job.
Okay. Are there any plans to write an autobiography?
No specific plans, but if I ever did get round to doing that, I would not be writing an autobiography in the sense of it just being again temporal continuity. It wouldn't begin with I was born in, and then take you through to the present day. I have no interest in writing that kind of an autobiography. I think what I would write about is probably more like a series of short essays that would be talking about my life, my world, but putting it into the context of the times and topics, and allowing you to relate your version of those times and those topics to what I perceive them to be. I think it'd be much more interesting not to be bound by the rigid temporal flow of a typical autobiography. I would find that rather dreary.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, few people have done what I'm suggesting, so
yeah.
I think the only person who might have veered in that direction was probably John le Carré, whose a book I read fairly recently, which is not exactly autobiographical. He's really talking about his times in the context of the books that he's written, and and I thought, well, yeah, he's doing what I had in mind to do, but he's done it. He's quite a bit older than I am, and I've still got time to think about it a little longer before I have to put pen to paper or pinky to QWERTY.
All right, man. Now for the good questions. Okay. Were you personal friends with any of the Beatles?
I've never met any of the Beatles, no. No. My wife used to work for Ringo Starr and George Harrison at Apple Records when she first left college.
Interesting.
She was a secretary working for Apple Records. But she was only there for a little while because Apple Records just fell apart. It was a well-intended experiment, but then she went to work for EMI. But no, I never met any of the Beatles, and lots of people I've never met, in fact. Probably that's a good thing.
Yeah, I suppose so. What were the effects of the loss of John Lennon in 1980 upon you, the music media, and society?
Well, John Lennon waved at me once from across a television studio when we were both on a music television show in the UK back around 1969, probably. And he was sitting with Yoko Ono, dressed in white, waiting for his slot to get up and do his hit. And he gave me a cheerful wave across the studio, which I was a little embarrassed by and didn't really know what to do. I didn't really feel that I could then go over and say, "Oh, hi, John, I'm Ian Anderson, nice to meet you," because that would seem a little forward to do that. But at least he gave me a little kind of acknowledgement. And so that's all I remember about him. And he seemed, at that point, a fairly benign character. He was the more interesting one of the Beatles, for sure, and even in the early days. It was... I never was very keen on Paul McCartney, and George Harrison was kind of okay, but seemed not really a terribly influential guitar player. And I always had a bit of the impression about George Harrison that he was a bit of a whinger, because he didn't get all the songwriting acknowledgement or credit that Lennon and McCartney did. Ringo seemed to know his place and just be sort of cheerful and get on with life, but never took to Paul McCartney's contributions really at all. I mean, he's a very skillful songwriter and a very talented man, but it just didn't appeal to me. Whereas Lennon's work with the Beatles seemed much more interesting and slightly more avant-garde.
Absolutely,
but the trouble was that Lennon, during the time leading up to his assassination, he had a lot of black marks against him. He was a rather checkered character who seemed to sometimes present the ugly side of his personality. So I don't think ultimately he was necessarily a likable man, or one that you could be you could have a relationship with in an unguarded way, because I think his use of drink and drugs, made him a rather volatile person, and sometimes from a female perspective, probably not the nicest person to have as a partner. But anyway, that's that. So great sadness that anybody loses their life so tragically. But perhaps in a way, I and lots of other people like me would be aware that this could have happened or could happen in the future to any one of us. And Lennon was the unlucky guy who, his particular stalker, fruitcake, nutcase, actually did the deed, whereas I've had a few of them, but they haven't been so far they've not been armed in my presence.
Oh, that's good.
But I've had a few death threats and a couple of attempts on my life. It just, I was lucky, and poor John Lennon was unlucky.
Yeah, I know. Well, okay. Is new music, especially instrumental composition, relevant in industrial societies such as America or Great Britain?
You mean instrumental music?
Yeah, basically instrumental composition. Yeah. Yeah. Is it
well, it ought
relevant?
to be. I mean, it certainly was in 8 out of Beethoven's 9th completed symphonies. Yes, it was, and it should be today that instrumental music has as much authority and relevance. But I guess people are seduced by the familiarity of words, of the expression of the human voice. I don't think it means that they listen to the lyrics particularly. And I'm a sinner rather than saint in that respect too, because I listen to music and I have no idea what they're singing about. I don't really listen to the words that carefully. It's the sound of the words. Mm-hmm. It's almost like in most cases, we hear sung music as almost as if the voice is another instrument. We recognize the sounds, we recognize some of the words, but we don't necessarily think what the lyrics are about or what we're being regaled with in terms of lyrical expression, and that is a little sad. But I'm as guilty as anybody for not really paying attention sometimes to what singers are singing. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the human voice does become part of instrumental music in that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Did you ever find the Jethro Tull format confining to you musically?
No, not at all. Because whether I just write music and do what I've been doing since 1968, and it never really enters into my mind that there's any constriction there as a part of it being released as Jethro Tull music or as a solo project or yesterday I was recording some flute as a guest on somebody else's album, and in a way you could say I was restricted by the nature of that music and the style of the music. Mm-hmm. But ultimately it's up to me to find my way of expressing somebody else's music, somebody else's performance, and find a way to be free of those constraints, to be able to creatively explore the options that are there ahead of me, even if they're perhaps quite simple ones, since this particular piece of music was a very simple piece of music. Uh-huh. But nonetheless, it's challenging to find the right way to let your musical imagination become unfettered by style and what is laid out in front of you. You've almost got to break free of that a little bit and explore the possibilities.
All right. Yep, I hear you there. Are there any similarities between your music and the music of Frank Zappa, such as the use of polyrhythms?
Well, I'm sure a musicologist would find some ways to make some positive comparisons as well as express a lot of differences. I mean, I was quite a fan of Frank Zappa. The two American artists that really captured my attention in the early 70s were Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart, who of course enjoyed a bit of an association for a while. And although I worked with Captain Beefheart, he was on tour with us at his request, since he heard that I was a fan of his. That was getting to know someone personally and musically on a much more intense level, whereas Zappa I never met. And I'd always heard that Frank Zappa had, was quite hostile towards Jethro Tull and a number of other British bands of that era who I guess he felt that they had somehow invaded America and played a card that he didn't really approve of. We we got attention, we got acclaim, we got
yeah,
we got a lot of record sales that he didn't get, and he was in a little bit of a bad mood with me and others, I think. But I equally am sure that later in life, shortly before his death, he did have a reappraisal of that, because I did get a phone call. Well, actually not a phone call. I got a message from actually one of his band that I knew, who said Frank wants you to call him, and gave me his home telephone number.
Wow.
And that was a very difficult thing to do, because Frank Zappa at that point was dying from prostate cancer, and indeed within a few weeks he was dead.
Oh yeah. Jeez.
And I found it impossible to actually. I dialed the number on 3 occasions and hung up before he'd answered, because I just didn't know what to do, what to say to a dying man.
Kind of awkward, yeah.
And I regret to this day that I didn't have the decency and found somewhere the resources to be able to talk to Frank Zappa under those circumstances, because it would have been nice to have just said, "Hey, Frank, sorry we never got a chance to meet, and loved your music, and have a tolerable death," which is really what the point of that conversation would have been, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think he was just at that point, I think, looking to make contact with some people that perhaps he never got round to saying hi to, and I happen to be one of them.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting story. His last words were, "Things go better with Coke."
Well, Frank Zappa was someone who, like me, was an observationist. He wrote very much from the point of view of his cynical and humorous observations. I think maybe the difference is that I do that some of the time and make fun or have fun with subjects, but I'm also capable of being serious, and once in a while I also let you see the soft white underbelly. Not that often, but I do write songs that are about me and give you a glimpse into my more vulnerable side.
Oh yeah,
but Frank never did that. Frank didn't do that. He just always
playing the anthropologist.
He really just couldn't somehow let us see the real Frank.
Yeah.
I don't know why. He just somehow couldn't.
His logic was
do
always
that
there.
in his music.
Yep. Okay. Speaking of the soft white underbelly, do you think the music business is robust or in a slump?
Well, people have been saying that for long before I started to play music. It's up and down and up and down. But of course, if you look at music in the context of the business side of music, in terms of the business model of making music, then that clearly radically changed about 15 years ago with the advent of digital technology and the inevitability that would have a huge impact not only on record companies but on the earning power of artists from selling records. And that is undeniably the case. But, the fans win out in all of this, because here in 2018, they can find almost everything that was ever recorded and released is out there and accessible somewhere.
That's
probably
true.
as a digital file rather than as an original record, but you can scour record shops and eBay and find all of these things, as well as probably they have been re-released and remastered and remade and available as digital files too. So you have an enormous amount of choice, and
That's true.
whilst the vast majority of music listening is done in the digital domain and generates a tiny fraction of income compared to going back to the 70s or 80s or even into the 90s.
Oh yeah.
For the artists who make the music and write the music, it nonetheless is, I suppose, still what the fan gets from it and what the artist is able to achieve in terms of making the music available.
Exactly.
So, whilst very few artists are making big bucks from selling records or selling music in any of the platforms available to the buyer, compared to the 70s and 80s, That shouldn't necessarily be a worry, because if you're careful, you can still make a living out of recording music, and you certainly can make a living out of performing music, because live performance, the concert music industry is probably, well, not probably, it's undoubtedly much, much bigger now than it ever was in any time in the history of planet Earth. So, we can console ourselves with the fact that the real deal, which is performance of music live, is very much a healthy and ongoing proposition. So as long as you have the physical wherewithal to do it, then as a musician you can continue to enjoy performance and the opportunity to either make a living or make a very good living, depending on how popular you are.
Okay, how does the fact that your music is available for free listening on YouTube affect your sales?
Well, that's very hard to judge. I think that it's two separate things. People would they would watch YouTube, they would listen to streamed music on Spotify and various other platforms where the artist gets little or nothing. But at the same time, that may serve as an entree to people actually going out and buying a record, and in the old-fashioned sense, whether it's a reissued vinyl version. They are different things, and I think in many ways they can contribute to each other. So
I see.
I'm at the end of my career. There's little point in worrying about something like that. I've made a ton of money out of selling records, so it's not something that I get bent out of shape about, the fact that people are getting music and not paying for it at all. That's fine. They still have to pay to buy a concert ticket to come and see me in a show, or they have to pay to buy the new 5.1 surround remastered version of some old album that's been reissued in some collector's edition. So we manage okay.
Okay, so this is going to be the last question. It's a dual philosophical question. The first part is, a lot of celebrities have passed away in recent years. Is there a life after death, and what do you think happens to your consciousness?
Well, we kind of went with that one before, and if there's a life after death, then I am going to spank the bottom of Amy Winehouse. Because I really think what an absolute waste of a person. I was not a fan of her music one little bit,
I see.
But I felt an enormous amount of compassion and sorrow for the fact that she led the life she did, and seemingly didn't really have the right people around her to save her from something terrible. And but yeah, if there's a life after death, I hope I meet Amy Winehouse, and I'm going to. I won't spank her bottom because that would have sexual connotations. I will give her a little bit of a ticking off for being silly.
Okay, and what will life?
But in terms of consciousness, no, I don't think that happens. So if there is some life beyond death, then it is in the hands of more mysterious controllers. I don't think we necessarily are going to recognize that we are born again or living in some other consciousness. I think it will be an experience that we will be enjoying but unaware of, in the sense of there being a prequel.
Okay.
As we are used to discussing the what went before
Absolutely.
scenario.
Okay. What will life be like after Tull with your music?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm of that ilk that dies with his boots on. I'm the cowboy, the Western hero cowboy. I ride into the sunset and I die with my boots on. The retirement is not an option. So if I'm lucky in my endeavors within the world of arts and entertainment, it is to go on much longer than I would be able to go on if I was a professional tennis player or a race driver or a pilot of a 747. If I worked for British Airways flying a 747, I would have been forced into retirement 5 years ago. And I would be unable now to get a license to fly that kind of a jet. It'd be hard enough maintaining a private pilot's license to fly a Cessna. Oh. So luckily, I'm not in that world. I don't have to have a license to do what I do. I don't have the paperwork. I just get out there and do it. So I'm lucky in the sense that my profession doesn't require retirement at some statutory age.
Oh,
and many of us kind of do go on pretty much to the end, and I was just noting today that William Shatner is in his late 80s, and he's still active and doing stuff and out there and doing many public appearances and traveling around America and even in Germany, I think, in a week or two, doing some Star Trek convention. And I mean, I say this only because I'm playing on a track of his yesterday, and so William Shatner is in the periphery of my consciousness because I've been working with him from afar, playing on a spoken word track that he recorded, and so I'm mindful of the fact he's what is he now? Probably 18 years older than I am, and he's still out there working for a living. So that's a way very encouraging that when you briefly enter the orbit of someone who's a good bit older than you, and you realize they're still doing what they're doing. That's tremendously
excellent attitude,
invigorating for a younger man like me.
All right, that's a great attitude to have. I have one more question before you go. Did you ever...
I thought that was the last one.
No, this is the last one. This is the bonus question. Did you ever get to jam with Jimi Hendrix?
No, I got to smoke with Jimi Hendrix because in very early 1969 we were on a show in Stockholm when we were just a kind of rookie band and we were supporting Jimi Hendrix, and there was a press conference for Jimi in the hotel, and our manager said, "Come on, we got to go to the press conference. All the media are going to be there. It's really important you meet people and get noticed." And I went in there, and it was just crowded with all these people drinking, and generally, just not my kind of a place. And I slipped out of a side door of the conference room in the hotel. I thought I'll just have a cigarette out of the way of everybody else. I lit up a cigarette and noticed down the darkened corridor the glow of another cigarette. And I looked in the gloom of the poorly lit corridor, and there was Jimi Hendrix hiding from the media as I was. And he said, "Hey, man." And I said, "Yes, hello, Mr. Hendrix, nice to meet you." And we briefly chatted, and I said, "Look, in there, all these people, they've come because of you. I think we ought to go in there, don't you?" And he reluctantly accompanied me into the room to his press conference. And that was the only time I ever actually met Jimi Hendrix, although we did play on a few other bills together at festivals in America, and of course the famous Isle of Wight festival in England, shortly after which Jimi died.
Yeah.
So we didn't get to jam, but we got to smoke. Cigarettes only, I hasten to add. I don't know what his was, but mine was probably a precursor of Marlboro Light. Before there were Marlboro Light, it was probably some filter-tipped English cigarette. Might have been a Benson and Hedges. Who knows? Oh
wow, that's a really
anyway. Okay, must go. Nice to talk to you, and
nice meeting you, and nice talking with you.
Yep.
And
cheers. Thank you.
Yep,
Bye now.
Yep,
Bye.
be seeing you.